in City Hall with our taxes and with the budget, and we're here tonight to give high-level direction to our city manager. I want to thank the subcommittee, Councillor Husson and Councillor Duggar, who have spent a copious amounts of time digging into the nitty and gritty details of our budget, asking hard questions, coming along in a journey together, having a space where we could challenge each other in our beliefs and reminding each other about what our priorities are, delivering great services, thinking about marginalized community members. What does the future of Beaverton look like? All of those questions we got to ask in an environment where we had experts surrounding us today. They did hours and hours of work in preparation for every single meeting. We spent hours together. They had to come during their lunch break, miss part of work, really dig in. And this kind of government subcommittees are essential to how we do businesses going forward. But all of us that have participated on them, it is a time commitment, but it is something we do regularly and will continue to do as we go on. I want the council to know I made a very deliberate decision on who we selected for the subcommittee. Councillor Duggar had years of experience as a budget committee member, as a chair. Councillor Hassan brings a unique lens with her background as a teacher and having a corporate job and an executive job, and one of the longest serving city councilors, oddly enough. And so I think the two of them together and myself, we brought out the very best of each other. What you see tonight is not a perfect recommendation. There was definitely disagreement among the three of us on how to move forward, but we listened, and what we came to was a great conclusion. To the staff, I want to thank you. To support the work of subcommittees, it takes an awful lot of your time, management, ordering lunches. So I want to thank Rachel for making sure we had lunch in all of our meetings. That was really important to us. To Ginny and the finance team for answering every single one of our questions, being incredibly detail-oriented, for bringing the best of what we have forward tonight with a lot of compromise. And to the City Council, I want to challenge us to remember our jobs in this role, which is high-level policy direction. I know it's going to be our gut reaction to start digging into details, offering $10,000 cuts, bringing what we think is the right solution forward. But in this form of government, what voters encouraged us and voted us in to do was to make high-level policy decision. So what we will be doing tonight is giving the city manager direction to come back with a budget. And so let's keep that in mind. What is our role? What is our responsibility? And what do we hope comes out the other end? My hope as mayor is that we have a united front to the voters, to our community members, to tell them this is what the next few years are going to look like, and to bring us back to our goals that we decided on this year. We knew this was a year of boring. This was a year of hard choices. This was a year of right-sizing our government and making sure that we have a prosperous future. The decisions this council will make tonight are going to determine Beaverton's future success for not just this year, but years to come. With that, I'm going to turn the meeting back over to our city manager, and thank you for allowing me to appear remotely tonight.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate all of your comments and for setting the table this evening. We're going to actually have Steve Toller, our consultant from Baker Tilly, lead us off. We'll have a budget preview. Oh, and excuse me, Mayor, could you do the roll call real quick before we move on?
Sure. I guess that's important. Will the city recorder call the roll?
Councillor Duggar.
Here.
Councillor Hartmeyer-Prigg.
Here.
Councillor Hassan.
Present.
Councillor Kimmy.
Here.
Councillor Teeter.
Here.
Councillor Tivnon.
Here.
Mayor Beatty.
Here.
All right, well, thank you. So without further ado, Steve Toller from Baker Tilly, take it away.
Great. Thanks, Jenny. Good evening, Madam Mayor and council members. It's nice to see some of you that I've had the opportunity to see in the past. I want to make sure I'm looking at you when I can, but also for the four of you that I have not had the opportunity before, it's great to meet you. And Councillor Kimmy, I hope to have an opportunity to meet you in person someday. So anyways, my name is Steve Toller. I'm a director with Baker Tilly, and we are a consulting firm that consults in our practice exclusively with local government. And I've served actually in local government for about 20 years of my career, plus the last 8 years in a consulting role. A lot of the work that we do is in this area here, which is, financial planning, fiscal sustainability, planning, analysis, et cetera. We have experience in working with agencies all across the United States, on the West Coast here in the PNW, and specifically here in Oregon. And I'm actually helping a community that's just on your border, also with the same type of issues that we're dealing with over there right now as well, with budget issues and budget strategies, et cetera. So there is a slide deck that we have that we'll use to just kind of support the discussion and facilitation tonight. I'm clearly not a PowerPoint reader, so don't worry about that. But we'll have that on the screen, and if I'll have our incredible staff go into the second slide here. Basically, an overview of what we're going to be wanting to cover tonight is really to recap, the city's budget and the fund organization. And I know that you've had some opportunities to have meetings recently, even as of late as last night, perhaps on some of these subjects. And so some of this might be kind of a recap, but it's also important to underscore some of the basis of really what is the city's budget? What are we trying to accomplish here with this conversation tonight? We're going to be focusing primarily on the general fund, which is the fund that funds a significant number of these services upon which your community relies, whether it's public safety or community development or a variety of, library, a variety of different aspects are helped to be funded through the general fund. We're going to talk about that and kind of share what some of those services are that are funded there. But then we're going to get into the heart of the matter of identifying, okay, what does that general fund show in terms of the forecast? And we'll be relying a little bit on the latest forecast that we know of, which was last year and prepared last year. As you know, staff is working hard in getting the numbers crunched and to be able to present to the council and to the budget committee your budget, which I believe will be coming to you on May 9th. And so we're operating from the forecast that had been done in the past, and we'll be kind of sharing with you some of what that forecast showed, and that helps to set the table in terms of what is the problem, issue, concerns, what is the gap that is trying to be solved as part of this project. And then we'll talk about the various budget strategies that were discussed with the FSC, the Fiscal Sustainability Committee, and talk through what some of those strategies are. And we'll identify and really kind of gate, your perspectives, your feedback, and ultimately direction through the city manager about what your expectations are in terms of this upcoming budget, as well as what elements should be included in a fiscal sustainability plan. So with that kind of as a backdrop, if I could ask us to go to the next slide. In fact, probably we'll advance to this next slide. Beyond that, I'm going to turn it over to Debbie real quick, your finance director, who's going to remind us all about what the city budget's about, and ultimately then focusing in on the general fund and how it's organized and what are some of the key issues that are funded out of there. Debbie, thanks.
Thanks, Steve. So just as a reminder, overall our city budget, the development of the budget is outlined in state law. It has to be balanced every year, so we do show how our in the projections, the lines that converge, but every year we solve that problem. What we're looking for is a longer-term solution, so we're not having to solve a problem every year. And then it goes to, in a standardized format, goes to the budget committee for approval and public input, and then ultimately to the council for final adoption. It shows all our revenues and expenditures. It shows the FTEs, the positions that we are budgeting to accomplish the goals that the budget lays out. And it outlines our major policies. It does talk about the council's goals, and there's narrative in there that provides context. So if you go to the next slide, the city's budget is organized in funds. So this is kind of where government accounting diverges from private sectors. Every fund is standalone and has to balance within its own self. We can move money from one fund to another fund, but we cannot, just to pay for services that are provided in that fund. So, for example, The city manager provides oversight to the staff, and so a piece of her could be allocated to other funds, finance department, the HR department, the IT department. Those all get allocated out based on the amount of service that's provided. So you do provide, kind of pay for services that other funds provide. And each fund, again, has its own revenues, has fund balance policy that the council has set. We will be looking at revisiting some of those fund balance policies, but it's a pretty large analysis work that we need to do. So right now, our fund balance policy for the general fund is to develop the budget at 11% target, with the knowledge that typically you don't spend all the money, so the year-end target is at 17%. And that's kind of awkward for budgeting, but that's the policy we currently have. And again, your fund balance or reserves should be used for specific items, like unforeseen events. We should not be using those to balance our budget. And again, the mechanism to spend money is appropriation, and that's what the council does, is they, when they adopt their budget, they approve the appropriations for the coming year. If you go to the next slide. Yes, ma'am.
Can you explain the 17% part again?
So the fund balance policy that's currently on the books as approved by council says that you will develop the budget with an 11% targeted fund balance, and would target ending the year with a 17% targeted fund balance. That's where it becomes kind of awkward, because you essentially have to save the money to get to that 17%. And so that's not necessarily a policy I would recommend to the council going forward. I think we need to have a specific target, and we need to work on that, and we need to maintain that. And I think we're going to need to grow to that target as we look at our fiscal recovery. We're not going to be at that 17% immediately. We may start at 11, and then we'll target 12, and incrementally get up there. And that's something that, again, during that period of time where we're incrementally doing that, we'll be bringing a new recommended policy forward for council's consideration.
And if I could add, just to be clear, it's 17% or 11% of annual operating expenditures, and it's that concept of reserves, or like your piggy bank, or your rainy day account that you have for personal budgeting, is that you want to have some money set aside so that if something happens or to occur, either catastrophic event or all of a sudden a drop in income that you might have, it gives you time to be able to figure out the next step. And it's the same thing with those reserve policies. And we'll talk about a little bit more about that perhaps in the forecast later, about that reserve policy and whether that is, how that kind of matches up with other agencies and whatnot. And so I just thought I'd add that. Thanks.
So as we've talked before, our budget is arranged in funds. So the general fund is our discretionary fund. That is the fund where all the taxes come in that don't have a specific required use. So we use that, one of our largest expenditures would be public safety out of the general fund. Just to give you an example, because they're not necessarily a revenue producing agency, they shouldn't be. And so the general fund needs to provide that support through the taxes. Special revenue funds are revenues that are for specific things, such as your gas tax, for example, is a special revenue. It has to be used for specific purposes, so it goes into a special revenue fund, and then we can track that the uses are appropriate for that fund. Enterprise funds are like a business, so everything needs to balance within each fund on its own, and it has to stand alone. Occasionally, those enterprise funds don't stand alone, but not in Beaverton. Our enterprise funds do stand alone, so that would be water, sewer, stormwater, primarily. We have internal service funds. Those are where you provide this fund provides service throughout the entire organization. Think of information technology, for example. They have their own fund, and they have there a certain amount of revenue that goes in, like a technology fee associated with development or some other very small amount, but for the most part, they receive general fund and street fund and water fund and sewer fund to help pay for the services provided by that department, and then and we look at how what services are provided where. So we are really allocating based on the service that's provided to each fund and or department. We have debt service funds. We don't have a large debt portfolio here, but our debt service funds are where we pay. So you take in your loaned money into that fund, and you pay your interest and principal payments out of that fund. Usually, it's always with a transfer in. So you may have a water debt service fund, and it doesn't have a lot of money in there. It would have just the reserve requirement for a bond. And then the water, sewer, stormwater, whatever enterprise fund is responsible for payment would transfer money into the debt service fund so that then we can make those payments. And then we have capital projects funds, and there's a variety of those. That's where we do all of our infrastructure work. And a lot of that is money transferred in from other funds as well. So you set up a project and you have 5 different funding sources. The project stands alone, but then the transfers in from all the different sources come in to help fund that project. So if you go to the next slide and then one more. As Steve said, we really do want to focus on our general fund, that being the city's discretionary fund. We need to make sure that it is available for the things that we need to do and the service we need to provide to our community. So the city's general fund is where we record our general revenues. So that's the property tax that's not designated for a specific purpose, such as we have a small piece of our property tax that goes to debt service on the police station when we built that. So this would be anything that's not designated for a specific purpose on the property tax comes here. We get right-of-way fees. We get grants. We're pretty good at getting grants. We get a lot of revenue from other governments. We have IGAs with our partners, and so any revenue that comes in from them goes in permits and service fees, and then, of course, fines and interest, which are, like court fines, and then interest income, which is not significant, but the interest rates right now, it's a little greater than we anticipated. On the operating side, so we organize in a couple different ways. We have organizations by department. We also have organization by function. And depending on how we're reporting, so in your audit, you have to report it by function. In your budget, you typically report it by department. So we keep it both ways. And you'll see a chart both ways, because that's what we do. So our general fund operations are public safety, the courts, neighborhood services, planning, economic development, administration, and then there's some public works operations in there. If you go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the total budget. This was the 22-23, our current year budget. You will see these numbers look slightly different from what we've been showing publicly, and that's because as you do your financial planning, you can't necessarily look at the numbers the same way you're required to put them into the budget. In the budget, you have to include your beginning working capital and you include your contingencies. And so if you take that out, and when you're doing your financial analysis and you're looking at trying to figure out what is your gap, you have to really take out the fund balance piece because that skews it. And so that's why you're seeing these numbers look slightly different. So we're looking at, again, property tax is nearly 50% of our revenue source. Property tax is a pretty stable tax overall. Typically, there's a 2-year lag if something's going to change and you see it coming, so you can plan for that. If you had sales tax, that would not be the case. Sales tax is very volatile. Interfund transfers, money goes in and out of all the funds a lot. And again, that's how we pay for the services that the funds provide to each other, or how we pay for capital projects and other things is to to keep our funds segregated, which is required under government fund accounting. Under our expenditures, you can see our police, public safety is 45% of our budget. And as I told you, again, they don't bring in revenue. They are a source, but a large part of our budget, as they should be, because again, public safety is very important, and they have a lot of staff. And to be able to run a public safety department the size we have and provide the service that our residents are looking for, it's appropriate that they would be a larger portion of the pie. Yeah.
Sorry, everybody. Clarifying question. So of these slices of the pie, which ones do bring in revenue? I'm assuming community development might. Which ones do?
Municipal court would bring in some. Finance, we do the billing, so we do the receivables out of the finance department, but that's for a variety of departments. So I don't know how much more is revenue that's outside of just tax revenue that comes in based on, like state shared revenue and the property taxes and stuff is not tied to a particular department.
Got it.
So community development does bring in revenue. A lot of that goes into the building fund. So it's not necessarily pure general fund.
General fund, okay.
So it's a variety of how that money flows into the city. But typically when you're looking at your general fund, it's discretionary tax revenue that funds it, and the fines and the fees are very small comparatively.
Okay, thank you.
So if you go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the same thing with the general fund. So again, we've taken out the fund balance so that you can actually see. And here's where like I said, we, as a finance department, keep our data in two different ways, one by function and one by department. So when you look by department, which is on the right side of the page, it's broken out by department, and you see that police department is 45%, community development 16%, and all the way down to the smallest department of capital development engineering. I think they're 0.1%, so they show up as 0%. They're a very small little piece of the pie. When you look by type, personnel is 72% of the budget. As a service organization, it takes people to provide service, so that's appropriate. I've actually seen that number higher in other agencies, but that's an appropriate mix for the type of service we provide. We're a service organization. It takes people to do that. You can see that the amount of money that supports those people, that's in the small kind of yellowish color, is not a lot of money to support those people. But that's how our budget's broken down by the type of expenditure. And now I will hand it back over to Steve.
But before we advance to the next slide, let's hold it there for a minute. Are there any questions about what Debbie just covered before we get into then what's it all mean?
I think it might be self-explanatory to the council, but for those that are watching, can you explain what capital outlay is?
Go ahead.
So capital outlay would be vehicles. So it's anything over, I believe, $10,000 and greater than 1 year of useful life. So it's going to be, like servers would maybe be considered capital outlay, like if you're buying a big server for IT, because it could be larger than $10,000 and it's certainly going to last longer than 1 year. So that most of our capital outlay in the general fund is for vehicle replacement.
Local government handles its accounting stuff a little different than, maybe your personal business or, private sector might, in terms, capital outlay is something that you include as an asset or whatnot. And in local government, we look at it more in terms of what are we spending. And if we're spending on buying a new vehicle or buying a new computer or whatever, we show that as an expense, so that way we can kind of track where's the money coming from and where's it going to, right? So, and whatnot. And so that pie chart on the right is really important, and I'll just, not repeat, but underscore one of the key takeaways really from that pie chart right there. Your general fund services are provided by people. And, when it comes to the cost of those people, it's makes up almost 3/4 of what you spend money on in terms of providing those services. And so when you're looking at trying to address any fiscal gap that there might be, you provide services with people. And so what are the ways to be able to address the gap so that it minimizes the potential for, impairing service delivery? And how do you address those then with understanding how you're spending those monies? So let's go to the next slide, and let me talk through your forecast. And for some of you that were on council during the last budget cycle, you will recall or maybe have seen this financial forecast. And let me basically set the tone in terms of what this is. And what this is it's looking in the future to identify what the potential trends are when it comes to revenues and when it comes to expenses. What are the monies that we believe and we project in moving forward will be able to come in to help pay for the services that are provided, which are your expense. And so forecasting is it's almost like crystal ball gazing. It's like, well, okay, how much can you really see into the future by looking into a crystal ball? A lot of people say that financial forecasting is basically math, but what it's really important and what it really relies upon is the transparency of the data, the transparency of the information that's incorporated in here, by virtue of the accuracy of the data, the accuracy of the revenues, the accuracy of what you have in terms of reserves to start with, and then the assumptions upon which it's based. And so this forecast was prepared last year during a time when we were just coming out of the pandemic. When we, at the time, what we knew is that it seemed like people were starting to get back into the swing of things. Things were starting to happen as they were. There was some concern about whether business travel would continue and what impacts that would have on transient lodging tax. What are the impacts that we're starting to see in terms of gas prices and other things? If you rewind the tape in your mind about a year ago, we didn't know necessarily that we were going to hit 9 to 10% inflation. We didn't know that we would have these supply chain issues as much as they have been experienced that have had significant impacts in terms of vehicle costs and a whole, buying technology because there was lack of chips and all those different types of things. The one thing about forecasting is that the numbers never stop moving. And so let's understand that as we look at this forecast. But the forecast was based on some realistic assumptions that assumed that based on your history, you've got about a 4% property tax growth each year that you have tended to experience over time. It was based upon, an understanding that some of the other governmental revenue sources that you have, whether it's liquor tax to state revenue sharing to even just franchise fees that you collect, they all have their different, growth patterns that we've seen in the past and in the future, and based on what some people are, and people even at the state level were saying, especially with respect to like liquor tax, cigarette tax, those types of taxes that the state monitors really closely. And so it was steeped based on some realistic revenue assumptions, as well as on the expenditure side, is that, it had a placeholder assumption in there with respect to 5% growth in compensation. It expected, 3% long-term inflation growth. Remember, of course, those things have changed, right? And so your staff is working on a revised forecast. But based on the forecast that was prepared last year in the information and the assumptions that were within it. The chart on the left shows what the progression of general fund reserves, that amount that's in the piggy bank, if you will, the savings account that you have for your general fund. And what you're seeing there is that the reserve levels, as you ended fiscal 22 or projected to end 22, and based on the adopted budget for 23, would be at about the $10 million level. But you see that it's below that green line. And that green line is that minimum reserve target we talked about, which is 17% of annual expenditures. I promised I would mention that a little bit, is that your reserve policy, in our opinion, is good. It's very good. It's reflective of the type of revenues that you collect, the potential risk that you would have in your general fund in terms of resources that you would be required to have if something were to catastrophic were to happen, or if you had an unexpected expense that needed to be taken care of. The Government Finance Officers Association, which is a bunch of finance wonks, but professionals in the United States, have established a standard of about 2 months or 17% of annual operating expenditures is a good minimum reserve threshold or target to have for your general fund. So we believe that the threshold that you have is good upon which to rely to make decisions that inform your decisions in the future in terms of the amount of reserves. But you see that when you were projected to end 23, you would actually fall a little bit below that 17% reserve target. And it's something that is going to have to be just watched, right? But of course, as you see the progression of what happens is that revenues and expenditures were imbalanced. If we start moving towards the right side of the graph here, you see what that imbalance is. And so for 23-24, it was projected based on all of the assumptions upon which this forecast was based, is that you would have a $9 million gap in the general fund. You would projected to spend $9 million more than you were taking in revenue. And it was only going to get worse. And that's because the largest share, remember the pies that we were showing before, on the revenue side, your largest revenue source is property taxes, which historically have only grown at a rate of about 3 or 4% because of some of the growth that you've had and the development you've had in the community. You've seen a little bit more than just a typical placeholder 3% that we have in the state. So you have experienced 4% growth, but your costs of providing services have exceeded that. And with the incredibly competitive labor market we have, especially in government, of being able to recruit and retain qualified people to serve a community, it has placed a lot of pressures in terms of being able to address that imbalance between the cost of providing services and the revenues upon which you can rely to fund those. And so the ongoing gap was going to grow up to about 13 million based on the assumptions that were used at that time by the time we hit fiscal 27. And that, of course, is assuming that no corrective action were being taken. Well, that's what we're talking about here tonight. Go ahead, Councilor.
I have a couple questions. So what is the total revenue percentage that we're expecting, that this model assumed would grow? I heard 4% for the property taxes, but the overall revenue projection for the general fund, do we know annually what we're expecting that to grow?
On average, based on last year's forecast, it was assumed that revenues were going to grow at a rate of about 3% per year, roughly, ballpark. Expenses were going to grow by about 4%. Okay. Because again, remember that there's a placeholder assumption in here that on an ongoing basis we'll experience 5% growth in our personnel costs. And let's remember that part of those personnel costs are also healthcare costs. And you know what's been going on with healthcare costs over the last several years and what's projected in the future, right? So that's what that imbalance is. It's 3% growth on the revenue side, 4% growth on the expenditure side.
So would you say it's accurate that the 4%, what's driving that? The imbalance is healthcare and pension costs. Is that largely what would you agree with that, or is there other things that are kind of? And the reason I ask this is I'm also thinking long term. We know that certain materials are expensive now. We can probably push some of those purchases off to where when inflation becomes normal again, right? But
Whatever that means.
Yeah, whatever that means, right? But we can't push off healthcare costs. We can't push off retirement costs that are hitting right now that we have to pay for. So I'm just trying to understand these drivers of this, expense. We know what's driving the revenue. Is it just healthcare and pension that are?
It's healthcare. It's being able to provide competitive compensation to ensure you can
So
recruit and
wages.
retain the employees that you need to provide the level of quality services you expect. But it is also some of those other inflationary impact and pressures that we see on materials and services, gas or not paper clips, but you know what I mean, the cost of technology and other things that have happened. And in fact, that's one of the things that, as we've talked through this, is that as staff is preparing your forecast based on this proposed budget that you'll be seeing in the next few weeks, it has to take into consideration that long-term inflationary assumptions now, what economists are expecting, what the investment markets are expecting in terms of what people are investing in for Treasury-inflated protected securities, are all assuming about a long-term inflationary assumption of about 4% now. And it will be a little higher over the next couple of years, probably in that 5% range or so. So again, numbers never sleep. They're always changing. And so we're going to have to be careful and mindful of what those pressures are and in building a forecast that's reasonable upon which you can rely to make decisions for this next year.
So if I'm reading this correctly, if we successfully close the gap, our reserve stays at around the $10 million level, or goes up a little to the 17%?
Yeah, based on what we saw here is that if you were to be able to close that gap of that $10 to $13 million per year, your reserves then would be projected to stay at that $10 million level. But you see that because the cost, your expenses are going to increase over time. When we're targeting 2 months or 17% of annual expenditures to keep pace, the bar becomes higher. And so we need to take that into consideration in terms of getting your reserves back to a level that is prudent to help support you long term. And so that might mean that you might need to be able to see some type of growth in the future.
And so these corrective actions that we're taking now, does it change our trajectory so that we are not going to see this problem crop up every time we do budget?
This is a great segue question into that what we're here to talk about tonight, right? Is that based on this forecast, we need to address this imbalance. Let's just put a number on it. Let's say it's about $14 million by the time we hit 27, right? $14 million is really what that target is in terms of being able to address this imbalance. So you need to find either a combination of $14 million per year annually of greater revenues or reduced costs, again, or a combination thereof, to be able to address that gap. You're also going to have to figure out a way to be able to address replenishing those reserves so that you can get back up to the 17% of annual of operating expenditures there. And in fact, if I can go to the next slide, because that really does beg the question, I appreciate the questions, Councilor, is just to set the context of what we're talking about here. If we're trying to target about $14 million per year, and if it were, and I'm not suggesting that it's done based on personnel, but let me just say, to set that context, that if there are no additional revenue sources that you can generate to be able to close that gap, and you saw that the predominant way that you provide services, of course, is people, just by way of context, that would equate to about 84 full-time employees in general fund. And what this chart shows you here is that your general fund currently right now is funding just under 400 full-time employees to provide the services this community relies upon. That's a 20% reduction, and you can understand what significant impact that could have on service delivery. And so that's just to help understand the context of what we're talking about here. It's not insurmountable. We can get through this. The key is, what are the strategies that can be implemented to do that? And that's what takes us to this next section. If I can ask us to advance probably 2 slides here. Let's talk about this fiscal sustainability planning and what that is. And it's basically taking the steps that are necessary to ensure that you can really deliver on the services that you are, enjoying and that have been promised to the community. And it's identifying those strategies in terms of either what can we do to maintain service levels, and that's where the primary focus is. But to the extent that service levels or that those strategies are not able to maintain service levels or not be able to address the gap, then we have to look at reducing services. And we typically think of these in terms of 4 buckets. And I'm going to advance to the next slide so that we can just help understand what those 4 buckets are. So the first 3 are trying to maintain service levels. And the first is what we call expenditure controls and cost shifts. These are ways to be able to squeeze the nickel a little bit harder, to be able to be more cost effective in terms of how services are provided, or what you're paying for expenses. For example, renegotiating a service contract is a typical way, or trying to renegotiate insurance rates or other things like that are ways that people will try to use those expenditure controls, or to streamline your operations. The second area is in the way of service delivery changes. I kind of think about this as reimagining or reimagineering the way that you're providing services. Are there ways to be able to provide those services at a lower cost more effectively? And sometimes that means that you're looking to fill excess capacity that you might have by insourcing with another agency, or maybe you're outsourcing some services to be able to provide those services a little bit more cost effectively, or perhaps you're looking at sharing services with another agency so that you can have economies of scale and reduce those costs. And so there's a whole variety of different ways to change service deliveries. The third is growing the size of the pie, right? Growing the revenue, the resources that you have to be able to pay for those services. And that's through increasing revenues by either increasing the base or increasing the rate of those services, or finding a new revenue source. So there's a variety of different options that you have to look at revenue enhancements. And again, to the extent that those 3 are not able to address the gap within the right timing, then you might need to look at reduced services. And that would be, I would presume, a last step in that. And I know that that's how the conversation is that we have had over the last several months that has led us up to tonight. So if we can go to the next slide, let me, as we think about budget strategies, I think of kind of this quadrant analysis, if you will, that's on the right-hand side of this. And when you think about it in terms of a strategy, what its fiscal impact, potential fiscal impact is, and you also think about it in terms of how difficult it is to perhaps implement it. I mean, this isn't rocket science necessarily. It's hard work, but it's not necessarily rocket science. And understanding that those items that are on the bottom right quadrant of this that are easy to implement, they have low level of difficulty, but a high rate of return, that's the low-hanging fruit. Those are the ones you want to go for, right? And typically we find that agencies have already moved forward with those, but if not, then it's an eye-opener to say, oh, this is something that we need to look at. But you look at the other opposite end of the spectrum, where if something is going to yield so little fiscal impact and it's so difficult to do, why would you even want to go there? It doesn't mean you don't necessarily want to go there, but it's like, it's not going to yield us much. So a lot of pain for very little gain, right? And so we think it's really important to think about that this way in terms of, what is the fiscal impact, and then what is the type of difficulty you might have. And that difficulty could range from, some pushback from the community about wanting to implement that strategy, if you're looking at reducing services or something like that, or in some cases, raising revenues could be looked at that way, or technical implementation, timing, disruptive impact on either service delivery to the community or within the city organization. These are all factors that have to be thought about in terms of evaluating budget strategies and whether they make sense to pursue. And so with that, let's go to the next slide. And what we have done, based on this $14 million target that we're looking at, based on the forecast that was prepared last year, which is being updated, we created these categories in terms of just evaluating these impacts. And so if something was going to have over $1 million, one strategy would have an annual ongoing impact of $1 million a year. That's pretty high impact. That's good, in terms of fiscal impact. Whereas if something was going to yield $100,000, it's going to take a lot of those to get up to $14 million. Doesn't mean you don't do it, but it's just maybe that's not where the focus needs to be. Maybe we need to look at some of those that are a little bit higher in terms of higher fiscal impact to address the gap. And so that is the framework by which we evaluated various strategies, and we identified them to present to the Fiscal Sustainability Committee and to you tonight.
I have another question too.
Yeah.
Assuming, I mean, the way I keep thinking of this is we're taking air out of the balloon. At some point, we hope to put it back in. Maybe not apples to apples, but I'm assuming if you make these larger, more high impact changes, it's much easier later on to go back and maybe reinstate them or revisit those instead of all these little tiny changes that have been made throughout the organization. Would you say that's?
Yeah, let me maybe rephrase it, and I'm sensing Jenny wanting to maybe jump in, but I don't know. But is that the more you can, if those big balloons help you raise the gap, right, or get rid of that gap and bring us up above hitting the ground, if you will, you definitely want to implement those to the fullest extent that you might be able to. And remember that they have to be ongoing. So it's not just one time. It's not like, oh, we found $1 million. That's great. It's got to be an ongoing. Yes. Or permanent, yes, permanent cuts, permanent revenue enhancements, permanent ways to be able to address that. So it can't just be one time. Of course, we also have to do it with the understanding that the numbers never sleep, and so when we're moving forward with making a decision, we have to do it based on the context of what we understand, right? You have to think about it that these are going to be ongoing from that perspective.
I have a follow-up to that.
Yeah.
So say it's 14 million this year of a combination, right, of reduction and or new revenue that comes in. Do we need to find 14 million every year going forward?
The strategies that are chosen need to have an ongoing impact so that every year they can provide you with $14 million in money, if you will, whether it's through greater revenues or reduced costs.
So, I mean, it's kind of hard since there's a plus and a minus in the equation, right? But say that $80 million is the target this year.
Yeah.
Is the target next year 87, and then the year after that it's 95, and that I'm just trying to understand, to Councilor Tibnon's point, is I understand there's some one-time actions we're taking now, but they need to. It was not that they get reinstated next year, right?
Yeah.
We are making a long decision, but what I'm trying to understand is this a conversation we will be having for the next 5-10 years to the same degree?
Of course, you'll be having budget discussions every year, clearly. But that said, and I get what you're saying there, Councilor, is that if you implement $14 million in strategies this year, right? The question then becomes, and as part of the analysis that's done as they're implemented, is what is the potential growth impact that has? So for example, if one of the strategies was, let's just say X revenue source, right? $1 million in new revenues that come in. If we expect that revenue is going to grow at a rate of 3 or 4%, we can build that into it that will help with that long term to address the potential growing gap, because remember that we also have, expenses that are going to increase over time. So with the $14 million that we're talking about, it's in terms of today's dollars that will need to be implemented. but we're also going to have to look at each of these strategies and identify what is the potential growth factor for those. A property tax that's growing at based on 3 or 4% per year has that potential to grow, like that in the future, right? Whereas this is not a good example, but franchise fees for cable services, how people are cutting the cord, we're seeing those being reduced, right? So for some reason that was able to be increased, which you're pretty much at the cap, but if it were, that's potentially a depleting revenue source for the future, and so it won't have that impact. But that all needs to be taken into consideration as these strategies are being looked at. Does that help?
I think so, but about a year ago, we used ARPA funds to kind of help us delay this a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And I think like when I look at the chart where you see it go from 10 to 1 and then red, that's if we did nothing, right? And so I kind of need us to get to the what we're doing part. I'm feeling anxiety quite seriously, even though I'm joking. And so what I'm just trying to understand is like that kind of, is this actually fixable? Right? Like, I mean, I know that there's going to be strategies in front of us, but I'm concerned because that's when you're talking about an $85 million general fund, $14 million is significant, right? You put it in the percent for us, 15 to 21%. So, like that feels really, really big. So I'm just trying to like understand, like, yes, we'll talk about budget every year, but are we going to be talking about these big solutions for fixing our budget every year? Or is our goal to come away this year feeling like we have a sustainable plan, into the future?
Yeah, the key is being able to implement these strategies quickly, because we see the reserves starting to come down to the airport runway, right? We want to make sure we get back up and get back up to altitude. And so those strategies can be implemented over the next couple of years. But what's key is making sure that your reserves are on a trend to then be able to be restored. So I know Councilor Kimmy, I believe, had a question, I think we saw.
Yeah, just two questions. Can you go back, explain to me exactly what 14 million was about? Because I think I get kind of mixed message. Maybe I don't understand. 14 million every year, is that what you're saying? Up to a certain number?
The number so can we go back a couple of slides so that we can see those charts that were there?
Slide 12.
One more. Yeah, there's quite a few. One more.
That one.
That's the one. There we go. Thank you. So I got a laid transition on it. Let me make sure I get your question right, Councilor Kimmy. It's this chart on the right, which shows the annual gap, right? The $9 million that grows up to 13 million.
Right.
What we're trying to do is we're trying to identify sufficient budget strategies that by the time we hit 27, we have and beyond, that we long term we have eliminated the gap. So $14 million that could be achieved by 27, with the assumption that it grows at the same rate as your expenses do, will be able to achieve that balance that you need. Is that helpful?
Okay. I got it. Yeah, you can go on.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So was there another part of the question? Okay. So, yeah, there we go. So let's go ahead and advance one more. And we'll show what these kind of look like. Let's talk about what these different budget strategies are. We identified, based on conversations that we had with your staff, by reviewing a variety of different documents, not the least of which were budget, were different documents that you had that helped to tell your story in terms of where your costs are and where as well as what your revenue sources are. We identified a total of 44 different budget strategies. Some of them, though, were in the end, as we started looking at it, had small to maybe low moderate fiscal impact. And when you're talking about such a large gap, we wanted to focus on the larger ones. And so, I've given you kind of a list of some examples here in terms of the strategies that were identified. For example, that first area, remember these buckets we talked about before? Expenditure controls and cost shifts, is really conducting an organizational assessment to be able to streamline service delivery and find ways to reduce costs for the services that you're currently providing. By streamlining processes, making avail yourself to technology that will leverage, that and being able to reduce the amount of ongoing operating costs that you have. Fleet utilization study is another example where, if you have a fleet of 200 vehicles, I'm just giving you examples right now. If you have a fleet of 200 vehicles, but only 150 of them are used, maybe the other 50 don't need to be around, and we don't need to be paying for insurance on them, and we don't need to be replacing them in the future. And that's what the concept of a fleet utilization study is. Asset management systems are a way to leverage technology to be able to really hone in on where is the infrastructure cost that you're trying to maintain, and how do you maintain them on a more cost-effective basis. Maybe a little bit more money now helps with reducing ongoing costs in that area. Service delivery changes. Are there opportunities for perhaps like for a corporation yard, partnership? I understand that there might be some pressures that you're having here in terms of how do you maintain and refurbish or have a corporation yard that meets the challenges that you have. I will tell you that next door, Tigard is also dealing with the same issues. So there's another, example of an opportunity. Are there ways to be able to partner with other agencies, or in the county or others, to be able to provide those types of things? Or is there a way to be able to regionalize some services, either by insourcing them because you do them so well, or by outsourcing them and leveraging some of the options that are available there? For an example of that is that 5 different cities in a local area that I was working with all maintained fire engines. I know you don't do fire, but I'm just giving you an example. Maintained fire apparatus. It's like, why are they each training themselves individually to do that? And there was a whole bunch of excess capacity. Why don't they regionalize that service? Why don't they regionalize that type of issue? And so those are some examples of service delivery changes. Revenue enhancements. Clearly, we're talking about property tax levy. Transportation utility fee is an option that you have. A local option levy, which you've probably seen some other agencies that have done those for a variety of different purposes. A local gas tax is another option. Doing a comprehensive fee study on an ongoing basis to ensure you're improving service delivery, or improving the cost recovery of those services is another area. And then, service level reductions, it's really just, what are the different services that might need to be reduced? Are there some special services or special events or sponsorships that you're doing that perhaps, when you're looking at services, whether they are core or essential or enhanced, however you define that, they will ultimately need to be prioritized. And how you make the decisions in terms of services that would need to be reduced under that scenario. So based on a total of 44 different strategies that were identified, we worked with and talked with the Fiscal Sustainability Committee representatives, and identified a series of strategies that we felt would be able to address the gap that we have. And if we can go to the next slide then, let me just cover these briefly. I tried to get them onto one sheet so that way it's just a little easier for us to kind of talk through it and refer back to it. So on the revenue enhancement side, let me just quickly kind of walk through these, and of which some of these you might be aware of. You do currently have some capacity within your existing property tax levy to be able to increase that. Please hear me. I'm not saying that these are easy. Understand that, right? But we're talking about a significant fiscal impact that needs to be addressed. And what are those strategies to address that? One of them is the tax levy that gives you the opportunity to be able to use your existing capacity to be able to increase property tax revenues in the general fund. And that's about $4.5 million a year. ongoing and then would continue to grow. A fee study to improve cost recovery based on conversations with staff is that there's the potential that you're probably could improve your cost recovery of of services that you are providing for a fee by increasing those, and that could be up to about $1 million in terms of improved revenues for the general fund. The third option is exploring a future local option levy, for certain essential services, and that would be subject to conversation. A lot of agencies around here have either implemented or are talking about implementing local option levies for such things as public safety services, dealing with the houselessness issue, dealing with maintenance, of infrastructure. So there are some opportunities there to do that, and based on what we're seeing some other agencies doing around, and normalizing that in terms of what the size of your population is, that and what your number of parcels that you have and the assessed valuation you have, could generate about over $3 million per year. Another area that would have positive impact to your street fund, at least, and being able to keep up with the street maintenance that you need to keep up with to maintain your pavement condition index at a reasonable level, is a transportation utility fee. A lot of other agencies around you have done that. That in itself has an opportunity to generate close to $7 million per year that will defer the need for the general fund to be able to have to pay for those types of services. So right there on the revenue side, we've identified about $15 million, over $15 million of potential impacts to assist the general fund. And on the right-hand side, go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a question. I'm not familiar with what a transportation utility fee is. Like, how is that applied? How would it affect a resident of Beaverton?
Yeah, a transportation utility fee is a fee, and I just want to make sure I'm bringing up some of the notes here that I had. It's a fee that is imposed on people that own vehicles in your community that will be dedicated. So it's an annual fee, right? That would be dedicated, or it could be done on a monthly basis or quarterly basis, depending on how you want to approach that. But it's a fee that's dedicated to dealing with transportation-related issues, and whether that is improving streets, providing bridge replacement or bridge enhancements, dealing with the train crossings that you have here, and rail crossings, and being able to address those types of issues, sidewalk improvements, creating bike lanes, all those different types of issues can be paid for with that, as well as some cities are able to use that money to invest in transportation alternatives to be able to reduce the wear and tear that you're seeing on your roadway infrastructure.
Okay, and what is to get to $6.8 million? How much would that fee be?
Yeah, and I'm going to have to look at that. I think that fee would have been on a per capita basis about $30 to $40, but I'll have to look at that for you and get that information for you. Dan?
If I remember the conversation correctly, I think it was closer to $70 per capita annually, but that's about average for the jurisdictions in our area that have that fee.
Yeah. Thank you. We explored a range, and yeah. So, yeah. Any other questions on that? Looking on the screen, no. On the expenditure side, what are some other areas that could be done? Reducing your materials and services budget in the general fund for this next year, on an ongoing basis by about $1 million was something that we identified as an option. A fleet utility utilization study that, based on the size of your fleet, we think could generate probably savings of about $600,000. The organizational assessment based on the size of your operations and focusing in on what are the different program areas that you have and the efficiencies, we think that has the potential to generate about $1.7 million in cost savings over the next couple of years of doing that study. I think that you have a very robust community development services group, and there might be ways to be able to reduce some of the more enhanced functions that are within that space. And looking at that as something that could be done over the next couple of years would potentially reduce your community development costs and or improve cost recovery by about $1.5 million a year. Community services and engagement, I know it's a very important program that you have, but when you're looking at having to make some choices in terms of righting your fiscal ship, if you will, you may have to be making some choices there in terms of what you're really able to do in that space. And so there was about $1.5 million that was identified that could potentially be reduced or become more cost effective in terms of addressing those types of services. The shared corporation yard services that I mentioned earlier, there are some ways that perhaps you'll be able to reduce your ongoing operating maintenance costs for your corporation yard if you were able to partner with another local agency. We think that could generate about $1 million in cost savings to you. And then finally, as a stopgap in terms of being able to address the fiscal gap that you have, is you might need to look at reducing some of your full-time equivalent staff that are paid out of your general fund. And if you were to do that up to about the amount of about $2.25 million, that would equate to over 10 to 15 positions that might need to be revisited. So in total, there's about $25 million of different strategies that were identified and were discussed with the Fiscal Sustainability Committee. At this point, I kind of want to just kind of see if there's any questions on those, but also turn it over to some of the FSC committee members if they had any thoughts, input, feedback they'd like to share at this time based on the conversations we've had. There's a Councilor Kimmy has a question.
Yeah, thanks for thorough explanation so far. I want to kind of second what the Council President has alluded to, which is how does all the tax levy impact individuals for Beaverton? Regards to property taxes, local option levy, utility fee, where and how you collect those. And then another second question is the property taxes that's going to be increased if it needs to be. Do we get full 100% of the increase, or we have to split up with Bureau? How does that work?
Yeah, Debbie, do you want to address?
So, yes, Bureau would benefit from an increase in the property tax levy. And
how much is that?
So the estimate on a current median home of around $500,000 is that it would be $126 a year, or a little over $10 a month.
How much are we a city getting and is Bureau getting?
So Bureau receives a portion of our property tax dollar in total. I believe the city gets, for every dollar, the city gets 21 cents, Bureau gets 9 cents. And so as you increase the dollars, they'll still get their 9 cents, they just get 9 cents on more dollars.
Can you go back?
Yes, I'll let Susan go ahead and give you that the thorough answer on that, because as our assistant finance director, she's much more involved in property taxes than I've been in my 6 months here.
Yeah, so the Bureau impact would depend on the assessed valuation within the Bureau boundary. So the Washington County assessor determines that. So they determine what that new assessed valuation would be, and then they would apply our permanent rate to that assessed valuation. And so it's difficult to say what that impact would be. The current impact of Bureau is roughly $1.5 million. So it would probably, it would go up from there, 1.7, 1.8 million in property tax revenue to Bureau. So it's based on assessed valuation is how Bureau works.
Okay, so 4.5 does not include Bureau or it includes Bureau?
It does not include
That's
Bureau.
just the
That's
general
just for the
fund.
general fund.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay,
so,
and
so what we're talking about here was just the general fund piece of that revenue.
okay. Um, so regards to future local levies, all these levies, fees, how do you collect from the individual residents? What I'm saying is everything coming from the property owners, number one? How is it collected?
Right, so the local option levy would be an additional property tax that would be funneled through the Washington County assessor, just like our permanent rate. The transportation utility fee, what some cities do, there are options on how to collect that. What some cities do that have their own utilities, like Beaverton does, is they add it to the monthly utility bill. And when they review how to charge that transportation utility fee, it's broken down into a monthly amount. There's this big manual out there in the transportation world that determines a per trip basis for either residential properties or commercial properties. And the best way to administer that would be to put it on the monthly utility bill, however the city wants to design that fee.
Then follow-up is Beaverton already has the Beaverton School District bond. And also, if you're going to raise property taxes, and then 2 years later, we're going to have option levy, that's, you're looking at a few $100 go up for property taxes. And I would love to see what is the breakdown for individual residents, property owners, renters, and also we have a lot of visitors. And what are the have you researched any other revenue option for visitors who come here utilizing our streets and our restaurants and our roads? So I don't want to burden all the property owners of the Beaverton so much, where I think everybody utilize the city has to somewhat pay into the system that we are improving. So that's comment and also something I would love to see if it comes out to be. Thank you.
All right, Councilor Hassan, did you have
It's more of a comment if you want to hear from fiscal sustainability subcommittee members. I don't know if this is the time, but I'm happy to kick us off. Okay. I'll just start with like the community that might be listening to us and city staff. Like the fiscal sustainability subcommittee members, as the mayor mentioned, have had many meetings to really digest this information. You know, the consultant mentioned we looked at over 44 strategies. What we have in front of us are the ones that we felt, whether all three of us on the subcommittee felt, whether one of us felt, whether two of us felt, that you all should be able to review. These are really big numbers and they're very intimidating. I think the purpose of tonight, or the way that I understand it, is for city staff to hear a general sense of how comfortable we feel. I don't think we're committing anything to tonight. I think we're just saying, like, we don't love a property tax levy, but if that's the direction that we need to go, we're ready to support it, as an example. Mostly, all of this doesn't feel great. Property tax increases does not feel great. Expenditure reductions do not feel great. Despite whatever heartburn I have about everything that's on here, personally, there's like a couple places that I'm just nervous, and the rest I think I can get behind. So I'm just going to share that. I am nervous about a future local option levy. I think we need to have deeper conversations around what that would be and what that would look like. So that is something I'm just kind of holding on. I am nervous about reducing community services and engagement programming. I think it's something that makes us special. And I am nervous about reducing staff. All of this gives me heartburn, but those are the three that I personally am like, just want us to pause and continue to think about. That said, I think what we're trying to do is just give a sense of how all of this makes us feel. And I acknowledge that most of us feel very uncomfortable, and yet we still have to grapple with this $10 million issue. So I know we've worked really hard. We've looked at a lot of different options. Even if we signal green light to some of these to the city manager, we're not committing to anything today. We're just starting to explore deeper. Conducting an organizational assessment is simply conducting an organizational assessment. If we move forward with that organizational assessment and that leads to a $1.7 million savings, woohoo. I think we're just giving a sense to the city on how we're feeling. So just kind of wanted to say that high level. Thanks.
Great. Madam Mayor, I noticed you had your hand up, or you, not your hand up, but you had something in there, but also Councilor Duggar wanted to jump in. Mayor, I'll defer to you.
Go ahead, Councilor Duggar.
Okay.
Cool. A couple things. I mean, I think this is my 4th or 5th budget cycle. As the mayor alluded to, none of us love any of this, really. But the question is, can we live with it? For me, I love Councilor Husson's comments. I share the same nervousness. I actually would extend that to the fee study as well. And I can tell you that's going to be tough for me to support. Not that I love businesses, big businesses and developers, but every fee we add that increases the cost of housing, that increases the cost of doing business. I think we have to be really careful with that. And I will support that on the condition that we also look at the cost structure of those fees and we see how we can reduce the cost of delivering those services. If we can do that, then I would support that. And that is consistent for the community members. One of the things that we looked at, and we looked at pretty comprehensively, was this can't be all on the revenue side. And for the staff, it can't be all on the cost side, right? It has to be a balance. And if you look at this, the general fund, 8.8 million in revenue enhancements, but 9.5 million in cuts. Like, that's a pretty balanced approach. I think we have a long history of being pretty balanced in our approach. So as much as I dislike a lot of this, I think I can live with it. And I think it's not going to be perfectly fair to every program, and it's not going to be perfectly fair to all the staff and to the community members. It's going to hit some people harder, but you know, over time, I think we can balance some of that, and I would encourage us. One of the things that, as a fiscal subcommittee member too, that keeps me up at night is none of these are great, none of these options, but we have to make this decision. You know, not tonight, but in the budget committee in the next month or two, we're going to have to make this. So I encourage each of you, think long and hard. None of us like all this stuff, but the fiscal subcommittee that you empowered us to really dive deep in this stuff. And that doesn't mean the other 40, you know, the other number of strategies aren't going to happen. It's just from a budget perspective, we have to kind of be at the 30,000, foot level looking at this. And I guess, not that I want to get preachy, but that's kind of what I really wanted to say is, like, we've put in the time. None of us love that, but I think we've created something that's livable. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor. Madam Mayor?
I think I opened almost all of our subcommittee meetings reminding my colleagues that we were going to have to hold each other accountable to making a decision. And that is hard for us as a body, a new body it's kind of working together for the first time. We don't have a lot of miles together to do this work. I agree with Councilor Husson and Councilor Duggar, but I want to drill into the realities a little bit deeper. We're going to give the city manager high-level thoughts tonight, but we're going to have to own this in the next couple of weeks and the next couple of years, because she's going to present a budget that has all of our opinions in it, and then is going to come back to us in 18 months and go, hey, remember that local option levy we talked about? I need you to remember that you agreed to this as part of our ongoing strategy. And so we have to kind of commit to going things together. we explored a lot in the subcommittee, and I'm sure all of you that know me well know I'm fairly opinionated. And we really came up with, I think, the best option to where we are. Do I want to raise property taxes? Absolutely not. I actually went into the subcommittee saying, that's a hard line in the sand. Give me anything other than raising our property taxes. And I had to agree that this is where we need to be right now. The reality is we've overspent and now we're trying to correct. And there's no other way to do that besides either raising property taxes or reducing expenditures. And what you see tonight is a combination of both of those. I think this is also an opportunity for us to pause and think about, what does Beaverton look like going forward? Our voters deliberately chose the form of government we have, not only here at the city, but they also decided to have special districts, special district water, special district park, special district fire. So when we're looking at some of these line items, what the work ahead of us that I see is coming out of this is more regional conversations around community services and engagement. I'm with Councilor Sun. That's what makes Beaverton special, is the events that we do. But I mean, Nadia's community just threw a massive culturally specific event with THPRD that the city just couldn't do. Even though we have one of the first Muslim elected officials in the state, we still couldn't do an Eid event. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for us to look towards our community partners, have conversations between us, the school district, and say, we want to have all of these events. Who is the right person to have it? That it could be the $1.5 million line item. Will we get everything we want? No, but there's a lot of duplications and outreach that all of our agencies are doing together. That is just a micro example of what is in this. But I see the work coming out of it is those conversations around bringing people together around space, bringing people together around events, and by people I mean other government agencies, to really think about Beaverton in its totality, because we've had a reputation as a city of always doing things alone. We are no longer in that position to do it. So our governmental relationships are going to be more important going forward than they are today. And I just say that because there's opportunity for us to get some of the stuff we want by better partnership going forward. So do I want to raise property taxes? Absolutely not. Do I want to do a local option levy? Having worked on many, many campaigns, probably more than everyone on this council combined, no, I don't want to do that either. But if that means continuing to have great services for our community, we have to be the shepherds of that conversation, and we have to kind of own where we are. So worry, whatever word that we're using to kind of move forward, I want to say, like, this is the best option we have at this point, is to accept the recommendation from the subcommittee, send our city manager back to bring us a budget with this in mind, and then make the hard decisions together over the next month, and continue to remind ourselves that these are the decisions that we made together for a prosperous future.
Okay. Thank you for that. And thank you to everyone on the subcommittee, city manager, everyone who played a role in that. I know just looking at all of this, these were some really difficult conversations. So several of these on here, I'm like, yep, got to do it. To me, this is no different than getting your own house in order, and everyone's being affected by inflation. 4% forecasted is way above the 2% annual raises that most people get. So I think it's not just us having this conversation. This is playing out everywhere in cities, other types of agencies, and in everyone's homes as well. The property tax levy, I don't have a problem with it. I don't want to pay. I'm going to be paying it too. It is not closing the gap. It is getting us closer to that. But I do not see Beaverton as being a city that has wasteful spending. I do think that we are generous, and we think of wonderful ways to celebrate our community, keep them safe, keep the streets in good shape, and tackle the hard stuff when we notice something isn't working right. I want to see us keeping that level of service. But I think we can explain this to people. The tax levy, to me, seems absolutely necessary and that's a hard thing to say. The fee study to improve our cost recovery, if I'm understanding this correctly, we pay a little bit to understand what other types of charges that we can impose on folks that are doing business with the city or doing business in the city around development or so forth.
I would say, as a quick summary, you want to look at your cost recovery levels. So how much are you recovering on the cost that it provides the service? And then it's been some time since we've actually right-sized that. It's not keeping up with inflation. And you may look at some fees you eliminate that you don't need. Some fees you may need to introduce new fees. Some need to be adjusted, right? So there could be a variety of outcomes in that comprehensive fee study, and we'll be looking at everything. So it's not just adding new fees or increasing fees. It's really, are we collecting fees on the right things? Are we collecting the right amount? So that's hence the word comprehensive. And so you'll be able to make a policy decision on, yeah, we're comfortable with 70% cost recovery, or no, you know what, we feel like that needs to be a little bit lower, or wow, I didn't realize it was 50%. We really need to take it up a notch. So you're going to be able to provide policy direction on that.
Okay.
And you can look at that each year and to see what level of recovery you have and whether you want to adjust it. And again, that's where your policy action will come in place. The next year, I'm already planning on doing something like this and building this in the budget, so you got a little bit of a sneak preview. And then we plan on 24-25 talking about what that would look like for that year.
Great. Okay. Thank you for the clarification on that one. That one seems pretty straightforward now. As far as this local option levy goes, Councilor Duggar and I attended an event by the Portland Business Alliance that released a report. It's called the State of the Downtown, but it actually aggregated really interesting statistics from all over the metro area, including out in Washington County. The appetite for more taxes is not there for the voters, and these levies go before the voters, unless I'm mistaken. And you see it all over the news. We are one of the most highly taxed states in the entire country. And I also see something like homelessness on here. And to me, this is a state emergency as well as being a city emergency. And I'm wondering, when is the state going to stop putting unfunded mandates on us and start sending us some money to tackle these issues, especially around something that doesn't have borders on it? I'm done with my rant on that one. I'm going to be a really hard sell on supporting any local option levy. And then the utility fee, that one seems more straightforward to me. I am passionate about pavement, and this has to get done, because if that doesn't get taken care of, the cost of that will very easily eclipse what you will ever be able to afford to get them back in shape. So that one, I appreciated seeing that on here, because pavement often gets left off the list. And the one that Councilor Husson brought up, and it's by far giving me the most heartburn, and it's not because it's touchy-feely, is the community development services and the this idea of what are enhanced functions. And I'm guessing the stuff that would be on the chopping block would be like the parade and events where we're going out and providing art experiences for people in the community and the joyous stuff, the stuff that pulls people together, that gives them opportunities to congregate, that gives money to our boards and commissions and our NACs to go out there and do likewise. I think it's absolutely vital. It's mental health, and it's keeping our community tied together and proud to be in Beaverton, and especially proud to be there even during the hard times, like when we have to raise property taxes and we have to make some cuts. So that falls in the same category as the future local option levy for me. Everything else on here is difficult, but I can see us getting through it together. So those were the thoughts that I had. Thank you for letting me share them.
Councilor Kimmy had raised his digital hand, but go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I've got one question and a couple comments. Jenny, I think the first question is for you. For the first strategy for expenditure reductions, it has reducing materials and services budget in the general fund. Can you share a little bit about the impact that might have on the projects that we have underway or coming up? Like, would it slow things down or change schedules? Can you touch on that?
Sure. So materials and supplies is pretty broad, and as you saw from one of the slides, it comprises about 18% of your expenditures. I would say that that's probably low-hanging fruit and not as impactful, although if you look at things like travel and train and things of that nature, it could be impactful to the staff's professional development. So over the aggregate, I would say that that's not good. You want to make sure that staff continues to be trained. And I will tell you, and you guys will get some sneak peek into my perception, is that that's not a place I'm going. Because that's going to nickel and dime this, and we're doing big picture stuff in larger scale. So I have kept most of that intact, so you should know that. I think the bigger issues are really personnel, frankly, and vacancy rates and things of that nature. That is what's going to impact your projects. And then Councilor Tivnon said something really important about, the state's helping us because we are having a lot of unfunded mandates, particularly in community development, and that's where I fear the most impact will be. That most of the staff time will be adhering to those requirements and not the time and attention on the local scale that we need for the projects that you've put before us as priorities. So balancing that and spinning those plates, I see as one of the challenges.
Okay, thank you. I also just want to say, kudos to the subcommittee group that worked on this. I can see myself getting behind any combination of these. I know the local option levy has gotten a little bit of pushback. I think for me, I'd be open to something like that if it was addressing a core systemic challenge that our city's facing. I think back to the Climate Action Task Force coming to council 5 or so months ago and talking about how we needed some systemic changes in our funding sources to be able to address our climate impact as a city. Maybe that's not a levy, maybe it's a different source, but I keep thinking about that and how can we address that with the revenue, with a little bit of revenue that we do have. That said, I also want to go talk about property taxes for a second. I do think we should be raising it to the full rate, and I don't think any of us ran for office wanting to raise property taxes. It's just not something you look forward to doing. But we do know that in order to move forward in a successful and sustainable way as a city, we got to balance our budget out. And this is something that hasn't been done in many, many years. And I think it's just something that we've got to, that I would be willing to do as a councilor now, so that 20 years from now the city can be doing much better things with the funding that we have. And then, I think I'll stop there. There's some good ideas here. I think this is really good. I won't stop there, I guess. I do have one other question, sorry. Are there any other revenue sources that the committee considered that didn't quite make the cut that had some potential, or is there anything we should be considering that's not on this list? Maybe if any committee members want to mention anything that they liked.
Councilor Duggar, I know we talked about annexation, and I don't know if this is the place to talk about it.
Yeah, I think there were a few different ones that we looked at, but going back to that chart of it's either minimally impactful or really hard to do, and so that it was these were the balances of they had the most impact and they were realistic to what we could do. I think there were some smaller ones, and then there were some really big aspirational ones we can get another $10 million if we annexed everything around us, but that is not something we have the power to do. So it was okay, let's remove those and focus on what we can achieve and what is realistic in the short term, and that we have the legal authority to levy, right? And I think what you found is what you're seeing, at least on the revenue side, is the balance of those things that we could achieve, that were realistic, and that were impactful. And I hope I described that well, Councilor Husson.
Yeah, and I would just say that a lot of the early suggestions from the consultants would require us to go to the voters. We don't really have a lot of constitutional ability to levy fees beyond what you're seeing here. And some of the early suggestions would have us going to voters 2 or 3 times, like a gross receipts tax and stuff of that nature. In annexation, there is copious amounts of state law in our way of doing that there's no way we could we couldn't use that as a get well plan in 2 to 3 years because it would require state law changes and buy-in. And so some of them, yeah, like in the future would be really awesome, but we couldn't impact it today. And I would just also mention, and I talked a little bit about this last night, and I'm not even sure our counselor fully grasped this, is that we're largely a bedroom community. So our property tax, because we lack commercial and we lack a lot of industrial land, from looking at Bureau numbers, we get way more property tax out of commercial and industrial space. And so annexing houses in doesn't necessarily it requires more services. Annexing houses and people require more library services, more police services, more of the really intensive services we need. And so annexation of more houses doesn't necessarily get us where we need to go. It increases the size of our city, but it's not really something long-term because we'd still have to maintain the streets. We'd have to deliver all those services. So what you have in front of you is basically a mixture of what we are. I also hear Councillor Tivnon, but I also want to tell the council, if we levy to our full capacity on property tax, the only place for us to go is a levy. So if we go all the way to our full amount today, that means never again in our future can we do anything without a levy. So really, we're agreeing to both things at the same time, is if we raise property tax to the full amount at some time in the future, we have to do a levy, or we're going to have to live within this means for a long time. And that's not impossible. We haven't raised property taxes in a lot of years. So I'm just saying, like, those two things are interconnected. And so we can't have one without the other. Or we're saying, hey, future elected officials, you're going to have to do something in the future because, like, we're term limited and good luck. That could be an option. I'm just saying.
I do think, Councillor Teeter, there was something about a business, and maybe Mayor, you mentioned it was the gross receipts tax. There was something about a payroll tax or gross receipts tax, just so you have full transparency on what some of the strategies were.
Yeah, and we discussed that in length too, because look at how much COVID money we just invested in saving businesses. So all this money we invested in save businesses, and then to turn around and tax them on top of it didn't seem like the right thing for us to do. But some of what you're seeing, conduct a fee study to improve cost recovery, some of that's going to be in there. Those that don't just live here, to Councillor Kimmy's point, it's not just property tax. We're also looking at who's doing work in the city as well. And so I think this is a good story of, it's not just property owners, but also renters, but also people that do the work here. We're kind of hitting everybody with this recommendation.
Councillor Kimmy?
Yeah, just wondering, is your presentation all done, or do you have some more to go?
Yeah, we're really just, could we just advance a few slides? Because I want to just talk about, this really was it, are there any questions on the strategies identified? We've already gone through that. Are there any questions on the recommended budget strategies from the FSC? And then, any further information that would be helpful to you that help guide the city manager in terms of the proposed budget. The final slide, and then we'll turn that slide off and just be able to talk with one another, right? If we can go one more slide, it's just dates that you just need to be aware of, which you probably already are aware of, with the Budget Committee meeting coming up on May 9th, and then May 23rd. There will be an opportunity then to provide input on some of those budget strategies that we've talked about tonight, and then ultimately Council will have to adopt the budget, and then we will provide some assistance based on the direction that you give in terms of what strategies need to be implemented, populating an implementation action plan. So with that, Councillor Kimmy, we are done with the presentation and we're in discussion now.
I wanted to kind of second what Councillor Hassan and Councillor Tivnon was saying about community engagement, where that's something, even though we're in a hard times, but it's something that community enjoys. And then being a part of Beaverton and Beaverton flavor, I would say, is where we all gather together and celebrate. So I want to be less impact on that, or not do more, but try to save as much as we can and do more community engagement as much as possible, to make us all feel better, number one. Number two would be, you told us that you have researched all the possible revenue sources. My question was, I was talking about meals tax, if that was on the table before, and why it was not considered if it wasn't. And another thing is, Mayor was saying that we have to go to voters, and maybe you can educate me on what needs to go to voters, and is that an option before our local option levy kicks in, that we might try to go to voters on some of the things? If that's another source of revenue, and what will be your recommendation? I don't know if that I addressed to mayor or who can answer me.
Oh, are you asking? Well, a levy, we have to go to voters. A gross receipt tax, we'd have to go to voters. To do annexation, they require 75% of an area to agree to come in. So most of the time, it's going to require us to go get compliance or agreement in our plan. What you see ahead of us right now, only has us going to the voters one time with the local option levy in the future.
Okay.
And so that's why we kind of looked at some of these that wouldn't require us to go get agreement for everything. Because you're correct, the school board had 2 back-to-back bonds. We know TVFNR is going for a bond. I listened in to THPRD last week that's doing a levy. Metro wants to do a housing bond. And Jenny showed last night, I wish we would have shown it here for our council, or maybe everyone else saw it, but it was a breakdown of a dollar bill where it had, like the school district taxes nearly twice what we do. But as the city, we really get blamed for everything, because when people think property taxes, we pay, like the city they're mad at the city, even though we only control, 21% of the levy tax rate. And so those are hard things. And that's what I have been talking with the city manager about. Timing. The levy is important for timing. We need to bring all of our community partners together in a room and say, who's going out for what are we trying to accomplish together? Otherwise, there's just a lot of chaos. Because I also agree with Councillor Tivnon. People don't have an appetite for more taxes, but unfortunately, this is the only place that cities can operate. And I will tell you, I spend probably 50% of my time as the mayor in Salem talking about unfunded mandates. I was on a 2-hour walk today with my daughter talking about unfunded mandates with House members and what we need to do to accomplish things they're asking us to do. And so you have a government relations team that is active in Salem. We are really able to be really effective in what we're doing, but it's not going to close a $10 million gap.
Oh, and thank you for that. Another question is, when we come up with this plan, did our economic development team was part of the team trying to come up with source of revenue? I just want to know, because I just don't hate to raise taxes all the time. Maybe find a way to create more revenue for the city. And then I saw that we have so much expenditure to the safety and police, and then I know during the pandemic, the revenue and fines went down. And is there any way to increase those fines and try to offset, and then trying to get the city balanced more quickly? That's what I'm wondering. I know you guys probably weighed everything. Just want to make sure that you guys actually did weigh everything. Thank you.
I will just say, Edward, we went and talked through everything. If there was a way for us to say more traffic tickets to get our way out of here, we would have already done that. And just a fun fact for anyone listening, over 80% of the tickets we issue are to non-city residents. And so I'm just saying people speed in other people's neighborhoods. So we looked a lot. We talked about the court fines. We talked about pre-pandemic. We have a lot of that information. And what the city manager is banking on, and she can talk a little bit too, is that we're likely going to see some of that pre-pandemic bounce back as we're starting to collect on water and utility and courts. But again, that's not going to dig us out of where we are now. That's going to right size us going forward. And so if there was a way for us to tighten our belt one notch and avoid all of this, I think we would have already done it. We've already done it. And so this is what's left.
Councillor Cheater had a question or comment?
Yeah, thank you. How long do local option levies last?
5 years, and then they have to be renewed.
Yeah, that would be difficult and exhausting, I think. Okay, thanks. The other question is, I'm looking at the next slide. Can we go to the next slide? And for the general fund category, fiscal year 2024, the revenue shows 4.5 million and expenditure reduction is 2.3. So I assume the 4.5 is the property tax increase, and the expenditures, I assume, is materials and services, and then other reductions. I'm just curious, what are those the numbers for the expenditure item, and then the total there is only 6.8 million?
Yeah, it's the reducing the materials and services, it's the fleet utilization, and it's probably a half a year of the, or not probably, it's about a half a year of the organizational assessment component.
Okay, great. And then total, that's only 6.8 million. So we're looking to close a gap of 9 to 10 million. Is this adequate? Am I missing something here?
The gap that we're trying to close is closer to $10 million, and your proposed budget closes that gap.
Okay, so these are just the strategies, and then some of the other
These are the
reductions
strategies that if you employed them, several of the strategies that are on this list, for instance, like the fee study, the property tax levy, those are going to be recommended to you at a certain level, and we'll talk about those on the 9th.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Councilor Hartmeyer.
Thank you. I agree with the sentiment of my colleagues. The thing that I'm actually struggling the most with is this transportation utility fee. I imagine we would have future work session on that specifically and be able to give input. So I'm not going to dive deep into it, but I like to put a lot of these things into real life scenarios for our residents, right? $70 annually is significant for a lot of people in our community. And so I would love us to get creative with it, and maybe we don't have to get 6.8 in that annual impact through it. Maybe it can be more gradual. Maybe we can get creative with the way in which we implement it to make sure that our lowest income folks who are dependent on a car are not hurt disproportionately through something like this. I think perhaps not this fee, but back when Metro was considering the Get Moving 2020, one of the techniques was to add a fee to our vehicle registration, and the community came out very strongly in opposition to that because of its impact on our lower income earners. So I have to be thinking about that too when we're looking at our own strategies. Is like, how can we actually do this in like the most equitable way to our community to make sure that people can still live here, right? And as a lot of us work on different transportation committees also, we know that we have a lot of work to do to make it a usable system for people, to make it their first choice, right? So I think like there's so many moving pieces that this one actually gives me the most heartache, is to say that we would do this in this way. That's not to say I'm opposed. I just think we really need to get really deep into that. And then the local option, I think it's tough. And it's the thing that is hard to swallow about it is it's not incremental enhanced services. It's not for new programs, right? This is just to operate our city. And so like that's real and it's something serious. And I would hope that we would continue to practice the things that the Fiscal Sustainability Committee and staff have come up with, so that perhaps the levy isn't needed in 2026, right? Like maybe we can continue to like really look at our expenses. And it's hard because we know that this is like, I like how city manager always challenges me to remember like what are core services, what are essential services. And I think we just have to continue to use that lens and making sure that we're taking care of our residents in the best way that we can. And to do that, we also have to make these hard decisions. So for me, transportation utility fee is the one that I want us to have a lot of conversation about. But I think that all of these strategies are something that we should keep in our tool belt to make this all come together over the next couple of years.
Thank you. Councilor Duggar?
I just want to respond a little bit to, because I shared your heartburn on in the subcommittee on the transportation utility fee. One thing that has helped me at least kind of work my way through this mentally, and I'm not to a yes already, right? I think we have a lot of work in front of us with that. But number one, we have a large shift happening with our transportation sector that people aren't paying taxes anymore, right? We're shifting from the gas tax to electric cars where people aren't contributing to that transportation funding at least as much as they were previously, right? And so we have to, whether it's this or whether it's some other form, we have to start thinking about how does everyone contribute to that transportation system in a way that's easy, manageable, and equitable. I'm nowhere near ready to sign off on the final numbers. The other thing I would say is right next door, our neighbor, Hillsborough, does one of these. And I think they generate between close to $4 million a year, I think is their target. Slightly bigger city, so maybe a little bit less than $40 per capita. But that's just something that, as I've been kind of doing my research, understanding that like it doesn't have to be a tool of more inequity. It can be a tool, if we do it the correct way, of being more equitable. But I think to your point, there's a lot of work in front of us on making sure that happens. And the other thing I would say, and I think Susan pointed this out earlier, this might be a relatively easy way to capture some revenue, because one of the things that I think is really difficult is when local governments start doing taxes that none of us can do, like income taxes and stuff like that, where we don't have the infrastructure to do that. And then you see things like in Portland, they do the arts tax. Great idea, really terrible execution, right? It's just really, really hard and really, really terrible. And they spend so much on administration that, you know, everybody knows all that. But it's just like, this might be one of those with our existing utility billing infrastructure. It might be a little bit easier to accomplish. But agree with you, we've got a lot of work to do. That's all. Thanks.
Sure. City Manager Hariyama.
Save the best for last. So we've been at this a couple of hours, and I want to make an attempt to kind of close this out. One, thank you for having this conversation. I know that this was really hard, and I appreciate all your feedback. I think it's going to be very helpful, because what I'd like to do, based on what I'm hearing, is I'd like to take the recommendations that are before you and develop an action plan. That action plan will come before you. It will have milestones. There will be deeper conversations on each and every one of these items. And so what I'm hearing is that proceed with caution. We have some concerns. I do want to clarify a few things that I heard. One is that I heard a lot of concern around expenditures and events and arts and things that we are really proud of. I'd like you to know that those are not going to be included as proposed reductions as a part of your budget. Those are actually going to be taken out so that you can have a conversation in the fall, because we have partners that we need to plan with, and we want to talk about what do we want to do for 24-25. And so you'll have a conversation with that in the fall, and you'll be able to give direction of what kind of a plan you would like to see and where your comfort level is. So I'd like to just reassure you on that. The other is that, you know, the organizational assessment is going to allow us to do that deep dive on where there's duplication, where maybe we need to kind of scratch our head and go, well, that doesn't seem right. And then bring some of those operational efficiencies that we see back to you. Some of them could include that, do we need to push out as many grants, or maybe we need to do something a little differently. And so I think it's going to tease out some of these concerns that you had about, what does it mean to reduce community services, or what does it mean to identify essential community development services. We want a third party to come help us work those through. So it's not we don't want to cut people off at their knees, so to speak, right? We want to do this very intentionally. The other is that what could also give you pause is, wow, reducing staffing. This reduction of trying to reduce up to 10% over 2 years is not about everyone's out the door. This is about looking as vacancies come up, moving things through attrition, consolidating positions. If a manager left, maybe it's a program coordinator, really reimagining how we do the work. So it's not about shoving people out the door. It's about thinking about things differently. So I want to reassure you about those type of things. But overall, this does seem really overwhelming. And I've normalized this. Debbie and I have normalized this, having done this. But guess what? This is actually doable. And this is a journey that we're going to go on, and we're going to be able to get there. And we're going to do it, and I think many of you said this, in a really balanced approach. I think we pride ourselves on that, and we will continue to do that. And you will have your fingerprints as a council over every single action item. I just need your head nods this evening to go, you know what? Please go ahead and start unpacking this for us and bring us a plan, and then we'll decide, Jenny, at what pace we're going to move forward and what this is going to look like. And I have total confidence in the staff and the resources that I bring that we're going to be able to do that together. I really look forward to having the budget conversation with you. You have said so much that makes me feel like that we are on the same page, moving forward and rowing together. So thank you for this time. And, with that, I just would open it, not open it back up. If there's anything we missed, let me know. I just want to be mindful of the time because we've worked really hard today. And I want to thank all the staff that's here. They contributed to a lot of insight, to Steve, to Debbie, to the recorder's office that always backs us up this evening. Thank you so much. And it's a team effort. So I look forward to having this conversation again soon on the 9th. And thank you.